The Council banished Earth forever. Humanity smiled and said good. HFY. Part 1. Let me tell you about the single most embarrassing day in the history of the Galactic Convergence Council. And trust me, that is a very competitive category. We once had a delegate from the Vorathi Hive accidentally declare war on a gas cloud because their translator malfunctioned. We had the Palunian ambassador eat the ceremonial peace scroll, on purpose mind you, as a power move. We even had the Great Schism of Sector 9, which started because two civilizations could not agree on whether the correct number of syllables in a formal greeting was 3 or 4. That one lasted 60 years. None of those, not a single embarrassing galaxy-brained catastrophe, came anywhere close to what happened on the day the Council banished the humans. My name is Vorek Salon, Senior Adjudicator of the Convergence Council's 7th Procedural Wing, and I was there. I had the best seat in the hall, which meant I had the worst seat in the galaxy, because I watched the whole thing unfold in excruciating, high-definition detail, and I could not stop any of it. You know that feeling when you see someone about to walk into a transparasteel door, and you open your mouth to warn them, but they hit it before the sound leaves your throat. That was my entire professional career, condensed into one afternoon. Now, for those of you living blissfully under a rock on some outer rim colony, here is the short version of how we got here. Humanity joined the Galactic Convergence approximately 41 years ago. They came in loud, enthusiastic, and aggressively friendly in the way that made every species in the hall instinctively check their pockets. The Convergence had seen upstart civilizations before. We had protocols. We had procedures. We had a beautifully designed 12-phase integration checklist developed over 2,000 years of diplomatic refinement. Humans completed it in 6 months. Not because we made it easy for them. We absolutely did not. The Keth Dominion had stalled their integration for 3 decades using nothing but procedural objections and a creative interpretation of the word pending. Humanity just bulldozed through it. Not aggressively, not rudely, but with this relentless, cheerful competence that somehow felt more unsettling than outright hostility. Councillor Drenna Vosk of the Silurian Compact once said, privately, in a tone usually reserved for describing natural disasters, that humans negotiated like they were doing you a favor by letting you have half. She was not wrong. For 41 years, humanity participated in the convergence. They voted, they proposed legislation, they built trade routes that made 3 previously isolationist civilizations extremely wealthy against their will. They founded medical programs, infrastructure initiatives, and this is my personal favorite, a diplomatic corps training school that produced graduates so effective at conflict resolution that 2 species who had been at war for centuries shook hands, looked confused, and went home. The Convergence did not know what to do with them. The Council, specifically, did not know what to do with them. So, naturally, they decided to get rid of them. The formal charges were presented by High Arbiter Thesson Kariv, a Vorathi of approximately 900 years of experience, 11 diplomatic commendations, and 1 very large, very fragile ego. He was flanked by 6 other senior counselors, representing civilizations who had, over the past decade, submitted a combined total of 412 formal complaints about human activity in convergence space. I had read every single one of them. My assistant, a young Palunian named Orvash, had needed 3 days and a mild sedative to finish the same task. The charges, summarized. Humanity was disruptive to established order, incompatible with convergence procedural tradition, economically destabilizing, and, this one, I still cannot say with a straight face, excessively optimistic in a manner inconsistent with galactic norms. That last one was submitted by the Keth Dominion. I will let you sit with that. The session was called to order at the 9th bell. I remember because the bell sounded, and then, approximately 3 seconds later, the human delegation walked in. There were 4 of them. 4. The Silurian Compact sent a delegation of 47 to routine budget reviews. The Vorathi Hive sent a legal team of 30 for anything involving the word amendment. Humanity sent 4 people to the hearing that was, functionally, their trial for continued existence in galactic civilization. Their lead delegate was a woman named Petra Voss. She was compact, unhurried, and carried a single datapad in one hand and a ceramic cup of something hot and steaming in the other. I later learned it was coffee. I have since been told that coffee is humanity's primary fuel source, their social lubricant, and their psychological armor simultaneously. Based on what I witnessed that day, I believe all three descriptions are accurate. Beside her was a man named Tariq Osei Bonsu, their chief legal counsel, who had the particular expression of someone who had already read the outcome of this meeting and found it mildly amusing. To his left stood Dr. Yumi Nakagawa, their scientific liaison, who was reviewing something on her own pad and had not looked up since entering the room. And finally, a young man named Brecken Fale, who appeared to be roughly half the age of everyone else present and was, inexplicably, smiling. Not smiling nervously. Not smiling diplomatically. Smiling like he had just heard a good joke and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. High Arbiter Thesson Kareev called the session to order with the ritual phrase, the full 16-syllable formal opening that signals the beginning of a proceeding of the highest gravity. Petra Voss acknowledged it with a nod and took a sip of her coffee. Thesson Kareev did not like that. He presented the charges. All of them, in detail, with supporting testimony from 7 council members and a 40-minute visual presentation that had clearly been prepared by someone who spent significant time on it and felt strongly about the subject. The hall was silent throughout, the kind of silence that presses on you from all sides when everyone present understands the weight of the moment. Petra Voss took notes. Tariq Osei Bonsu occasionally nodded slowly, in the specific way that I recognized, after 40 years of watching diplomats, as meaning, yes, I have already thought of that, and 17 things you have not mentioned yet. Dr. 40 years of watching diplomats, as meaning, yes, I have already thought of that, and 17 things you have not mentioned yet. Nakagawa finished whatever she was reading and put her pad face down on the table. Brecken Fale stopped smiling at some point during the third charge and started listening with an expression of focused attention that, for reasons I cannot entirely explain, was somehow more unnerving than the smile. When Thesson Kareev finished, the hall held its breath. He announced the Council's proposed resolution. Earth and all human colonies would be formally expelled from the Galactic Convergence, their voting rights revoked, their trade agreements dissolved, their seats in all convergence institutions vacated, effective immediately upon ratification by majority vote. They would be classified as an unaffiliated biological presence, which is the convergence's extremely polite way of saying, you are no longer our problem, please stop being near us. There was a formal provision for the accused to respond before the vote was called. Thesson Kareev nodded toward the human delegation with the air of someone extending a courtesy they expect to be declined. Petra Voss set down her coffee, stood up, smoothed the front of her jacket, and said, thank you. The hall waited, she said. We accept. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of 400 intelligent beings across 37 civilizations all having the same thought simultaneously, which was, wait, Thesson Kareev blinked. He has 8 eyes, so this was a notably complex maneuver, and it still somehow conveyed pure, unfiltered confusion. He said, in a voice carefully stripped of everything except procedure, Delegate Voss, the resolution calls for humanity's expulsion. You are accepting expulsion. Yes, she said. From the convergence. Yes, permanently. She nodded once, and smiled, and said, good. Orvash, sitting beside me in the adjudicator's gallery, leaned over and whispered, did she say good? I said nothing because I was watching Tariq Osei Bonsu, who had opened a new document on his datapad and was typing rapidly, and Dr. Nakagawa, who had picked her pad back up and appeared to be sending a message to someone outside this building, and Brecken Fale, who had returned to smiling. Thesson Kareev gathered himself. He was 900 years old and had navigated worse situations. He said carefully, Delegate, I want to be certain you understand the implications. Expulsion means the dissolution of all treaties, all trade agreements, all protections guaranteed under convergence law. Human vessels will have no guaranteed safe passage in convergence space. Human colonies outside your home system will receive no convergence infrastructure support. You will be, in every meaningful sense, alone. Petra Voss said, we understand. Tariq Osei Bonsu said, without looking up from his typing, we have prepared a document. He produced, from a bag beside his chair, a physical document, printed on actual material, bound, approximately 4 centimeters thick. He slid it across the table toward the council dais with the easy motion of someone who had practiced exactly this gesture. He said, "It is a formal acknowledgement of the terms of expulsion, co-signed by the Human Colonial Authority, the Earth Sovereign Assembly, and the Unified Frontier Councils, ratifying humanity's full voluntary acceptance of the resolution as stated." He paused. "We had it prepared 3 weeks ago. The Council banished Earth forever." Humanity smiled and said, "Good. HFY Part 2, 3 weeks ago." Let me be very clear about what that means, because I watched at least 6 council members do the same mental arithmetic in real time, and the expressions on their faces were worth every uncomfortable moment I had endured in 40 years of public service. The council had finalized the expulsion resolution 11 days ago, in a closed session that was, by every procedural standard, classified. The vote to bring it to formal hearing had been called 9 days ago. The official notification to the human delegation had been delivered 7 days ago, which was, according to every established convergence protocol, the earliest possible moment humanity could have known this was coming. Tariq Osei-Bonsu had said 3 weeks. Councillor Drenna Vosk of the Silurian Compact made a sound that her species reserves for moments of profound existential discomfort. It is somewhere between a cough and a question, and there is genuinely no word for it in any other language, but every species present understood it perfectly because they were all feeling the same thing. High Arbiter Thesson Kariv looked at the bound document on the table in front of him, the way you look at something you are not entirely sure is safe to touch. He said slowly, "You prepared this 3 weeks ago." Petra Voss said, "We prepared for several outcomes." She said it, the way you say the weather is mild. Conversational, unbothered, like she was commenting on the temperature of a room, and not casually revealing that humanity had seen this coming before the council had even finished deciding to do it. Orvash leaned over to me again. His voice had taken on the specific register of someone watching a building fall in slow motion. He whispered, "How did they know?" I whispered back, "I have stopped asking questions like that." Thesson Karev, to his credit, recovered. 900 years of experience is good for something. He straightened, settled both sets of his upper limbs into the formal deliberation posture, and said, with the weight of someone who still believed this proceeding was going the way he had planned, "Very well. The Council will proceed to ratification. All in favor of the expulsion resolution as stated?" The vote was 31-6. Humanity was formally, officially, permanently expelled from the Galactic Convergence. Petra Voss shook hands with the 3 delegates seated nearest to her, which was not a convergence custom, and therefore baffled all 3 of them into complying reflexively. She picked up her coffee. She said, to the room at large, "We appreciate the 41 years of membership." Then she looked directly at Thesson Karev, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way that was technically not a smile, but was clearly in the same family as one. "We will be in touch," she said. Then the 4 of them walked out. Brecken Fowle, the youngest one, paused at the door, turned back, and said, cheerfully, to no one in particular, "Good luck with the Ven Karathi trade dispute, by the way. You are going to need a new arbitration framework. Ours just became unavailable." Then he left. The hall sat in silence for a long moment. Then Councillor Breth Una of the Keth Dominion, who had filed 40 of those 412 complaints personally, said in a very small voice, "What is the Ven Karathi trade dispute?" It turned out, and I mean this precisely, that the entire Eastern Trade Corridor between 7 convergence member civilizations had been, for the past 19 years, running on an arbitration and logistics framework quietly designed, maintained, and staffed almost entirely by human-operated institutions. Nobody had noticed because it worked. It worked so smoothly, so reliably, that the civilizations using it had simply assumed it was old convergence infrastructure, legacy systems from before their membership, something ancient and automatic and permanent. It was not ancient. It was not automatic. It was a Terran logistics company called Bridgepoint Interstellar, a human arbitration firm called the Voss Osei Group. Yes, those names, take a moment, and approximately 2,000 human staffers across 9 stations who showed up every day, and made the Eastern Corridor function. Their contracts, as Tariq Osi Bonsu had very helpfully noted in an appendix of the bound document now sitting on Thesson Kariv's desk, terminated upon expulsion, effective immediately. I want to give you a complete and honest account of the next 72 hours. But I also want you to understand that I am a trained professional with 4 decades of diplomatic experience, and I still needed to sit quietly in a dark room for a portion of that time period, just to process what I was witnessing. 7 civilizations discovered simultaneously that their primary trade corridor had no functioning arbitration. Freight vessels began backing up at 3 junction points within the first 6 hours. 2 automated contract renewal systems, which had been quietly pinging Bridgepoint Interstellar's servers for years without anyone aboard noticing, started generating error codes that nobody recognized because nobody had written documentation for the contingency of Bridgepoint Interstellar not existing from their perspective. Counselor Drenna Vosk called my office 4 times in the first 12 hours. Each call was shorter than the last, which I found more alarming than if they had gotten longer. By the 4th call she said only, "Vorek Salan, what have we done?" and then ended the transmission before I could answer, which was fine because I did not have an answer. The economic disruption was significant. Not catastrophic, not civilization ending. I want to be accurate. But it was loud, it was visible, and it was in the specific way that only certain kinds of damage can be. Educational. Because here is what the Council had spent 41 years watching without fully understanding. Humans do not conquer things. They do not demand. They do not position themselves in ways that announce what they are doing. They build things, quietly, competently, in places where things need building, and then they become load-bearing. They become the thing that everything else leans on without realizing it. And when you push them out, you discover the weight. On the 4th day after the expulsion, Thesson Kariv convened an emergency session. I attended. Everyone attended. The hall was fuller than it had been for the ratification vote, which tells you everything about what a difference 72 hours and a collapsed arbitration corridor can make to one's sense of urgency. The proposal on the table was, functionally, a reversal. A new resolution offering humanity readmission under a restructured membership framework. There were concessions involved, significant ones. The language in the draft, which I had been asked to review at 3 in the morning local station time, was some of the most carefully worded diplomatic text I had read in my career, which is to say it was the convergence trying very hard to say please come back without using any of those words. I submitted my review with one note. I had no idea whether they would accept. The message was transmitted to Earth. The response came back in 40 minutes, which for a civilization that had just been formally expelled from the largest governing body in the known galaxy, was either very fast or suspiciously fast, and I had learned to treat both of those as the same thing when humans were involved. The response was from Petra Voss. It said, in its entirety, "Thank you for your message. We would be glad to discuss terms. Please be aware that our current availability is limited, as we are in the early stages of several new infrastructure projects in unaffiliated space. We can schedule preliminary discussions for 6 weeks from today. Attached, please find our preliminary framework for read-emission terms." The attachment was 63 pages long. Orvash read it before I did. Because Orvash is faster, and also because I had needed another moment in my dark room. He came to find me with an expression I had not seen on his face before, which was impressive because he had worked for me for 11 years, and I thought I had catalogued all of them. He stood in my doorway and said, "Sir, they want a permanent seat on the high arbitration panel." I said, "Of course they do." He said, "And full economic autonomy for human colonies outside the core systems, with convergence protection guarantees but no convergence economic oversight." I said, "Naturally." He said, "And the Ven Karathi corridor arbitration rights, formalized and under human institutional control, with convergence member civilizations as clients rather than governing authorities." I said, "Tariq Osei Bonsu wrote that section." Orvash said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because it is elegant, and it is permanent, and it has 3 redundant legal clauses that make it nearly impossible to revoke, and that is his signature." I paused. "What else?" Orvash looked at his pad. "There are 41 additional clauses. Many of them are things we should probably have offered them when they first joined." He paused. Some of them are things they specifically asked for in their first decade of membership and were denied. I sat with that for a moment. Here is what I had understood, watching Petra Voss walk out of the ratification session with her coffee, that I do not think Thesson Kareev had understood, and that I suspect humanity had been waiting patiently for the Council to learn. The expulsion was not a punishment. It was a negotiation. The most expensive negotiation in Convergence history, paid for by 72 hours of corridor disruption, and one very thick bound document prepared 3 weeks before it was needed, but a negotiation nonetheless. Humanity had not walked into that hall to fight for their membership. They had walked in to let the Council vote, watch the consequences arrive on schedule, and then sit down at a table where, for the first time in 41 years, they were not the ones asking for something. The Council accepted the terms. Not all of them immediately. There were 6 weeks of discussions, exactly as Petra Voss had indicated, because she had apparently already allocated exactly that much time for it. Some clauses were negotiated, a few were modified at the margins. The core of it held. Humanity returned to the Convergence with a permanent high arbitration seat, formalized corridor rights, and economic autonomy provisions that 3 other civilizations quietly requested similar versions of within the following year. I attended the readmission ceremony. Thesson Kareev performed it with the dignity of a being who had decided wisely to treat the entire preceding month as a learning experience rather than a defeat. Petra Voss accepted the readmission with a brief, gracious speech that contained no trace of gloating whatsoever, which I found more impressive than anything else she had done, because I know how hard that is. Brecken Fala, standing again at the edge of the delegation, was smiling. Afterward, in the corridor outside the hall, I found myself walking near him. I am not certain what made me do it. Professional curiosity, perhaps, or 40 years of watching civilizations make decisions and wanting, just once, to ask a direct question and receive a direct answer. I said to him, "Did you know, when you walked in that day, exactly how it would go?" He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. He was young, I realized again. Young by human standards, which meant he was extraordinarily young by mine. He said we knew what we had built. We knew what it would cost them if we left. He paused. We also knew they would not figure that out until they felt it. I said, "That is a significant gamble." He said, "Not really." And then, with the smile still in place, he added, "We also knew we would be fine either way." I thought about the infrastructure projects, the unaffiliated space, the 63-page document prepared before the ink was dry on the expulsion resolution. I said, "Yes, I imagine you would have been." He nodded pleasantly and walked away, and I stood in the corridor of the most powerful governing institution in the known galaxy and thought about a species that had shown up 41 years ago, loud and friendly and aggressively competent, and had quietly, cheerfully, without a single act of hostility, made themselves indispensable to everyone around them, just waiting for the day someone made the extraordinary mistake of telling them they were not wanted. They had smiled and said good. And the galaxy had learned, at considerable expense, exactly what that smile meant. My name is Vorek Salm. I have been senior adjudicator for 41 years. I have seen a great many things. I have never, in all of that time, made the mistake of underestimating a species that does not feel the need to prove anything. I do not intend to start now.